Welcome back to Farm Science Review, everybody, and to the Agronomic Crops Plots poster session area. Today we have with us Harold Waters. Harold, do we need to apply sulfur to crops in Ohio? Are there deficiencies here?
First question is, do we need to apply sulfur? Probably not yet, at least not across the whole state. Do we have deficiencies? Yes. The deficiencies we're likely to see in Ohio are probably going to be on our sands, our gravels, or the very low organic matter soils. So those are the places we might look for it. I've got a few pictures here on my screen. Three deficiencies you might see in Ohio. That's nitrogen, potassium, and then sulfur. The sulfur is the one I rarely get calls about, but the potassium and the nitrogen are ones I frequently get calls, including as of yesterday.
So if sulfur is an important nutrient and you see occasional deficiencies, where's it coming from?
So our sulfur, probably first place it's coming from is our soil organic matter. So we mineralize sulfur the same way we mineralize nitrogen. As we get into the growing season, warm, moist conditions, it starts rolling out of organic matter. The other place we get sulfur in Ohio, because we're in the eastern U.S., have these coal-fired power plants on the river to the east of me, to the south of me, and then, of course, we have even some power plants, sitting in central Indiana. In the past, we might have got 40 or 50 pounds of sulfur from those coal-fired power plants, spread across the state of Ohio. All our sulfur needs were met. No need to apply it. Even on the sandy soils, we probably didn't need to apply sulfur. But with natural gas, burning of natural gas and low sulfur coal, a lot of that's gone away.
I've heard that the sulfate ion can be easily leached. You mentioned that we used to get 40 to 50. So how much sulfur does a grain crop need in a year?
So crops in Ohio, we need maybe 15 to 20 pounds of sulfur, depending on your yield. And then sulfur doesn't stay around. Sulfur's leached, much the way that nitrates are leached. It will move down through the profile, out the bottom, and into our water, whatever, and then go downstream. As a result, as we get less and less deposited, that's why we think going forward we might have some sulfur deficiencies developing.
So you're thinking in Ohio we might have some sulfur deficiencies developing in the future. Why is it I'm seeing some information coming out of states to the west of us, Midwest and High Plains, that are showing a need for that application of sulfur? And
so I have friends, acquaintances, coworkers, whatever, in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, certainly. They are showing more frequent sulfur deficiencies, not constantly, I guess I'll put it in those terms, but certainly it's showing up more frequently. But they're still seeing them first on sands, on gravels, and low organic matter soils. And then they're starting to see it occasionally, maybe in the middle of a cornfield that's a clay loam rather than a sandy loam or something like that. And we need to keep an eye on it. Part of the reason, of course, they're seeing it more often than we are is they don't have those coal-fired power plants to their west. Prevailing winds move west to east. So they don't have those that deposition that we still are getting, and maybe we're still getting 15 pounds, 10 to 15 pounds, depending on where you are in Ohio.
that's very interesting. What are you or what's Ohio State doing to help determine when we cross that line and may start seeing more responses to sulfur?
So I've been doing on-farm sulfur work going back, to the early 2000s with farmers. We never saw a response. I kind of slowed down. Some of them got tired of me doing the work on their farms because we just never saw a response. But I have continued to do my work in some of my small plots, and I'll slide the screen up a little bit here and show you some of my results. So at the Western Research Station, which is in South Charleston, I do small plot trials. And I show the work here since 2016, and this will continue. I think as time goes on, we will start to see some deficiencies. It's just that so far we haven't seen much. So I'll just show you what I have here. So I try and target places on the farm where we have low organic matter. I spent maybe $5,000 to do some small grid work, 8 years ago, and then picked out some places where we could do some work like this. So organic matters here is showing 1.8% there at the top. I've got a couple places, 2.7% organic matter at the bottom. Below 2% is where we would typically expect to see a response if there's going to be one. And so I've got some 1.8s on there. I've got 3 or 4 of them. It looks like we would not expect to see it above that 2% cutoff. So anyway, just real briefly, I'll walk you through some of my work, and then I'll talk about some work that Laura Lindsay's done, our soybean specialist, and then Steve Coleman has continued to do some work as well on sulfur. So I broke this out, corn and soybeans, top and bottom, without sulfur. With sulfur is the yield data there. And then you can see, here's my LSD, and I use a 10% cutoff point, so 90% confidence level. And for the most part, we have NSD, so we have no significant difference. So no yield difference between without sulfur and with sulfur. I do have, and this is like the first time I've ever seen it on this farm, but in 2019 with a 2.4% organic matter, I got a 20 bushel increase in yield with the addition of sulfur. I have continued this work again this year, and we'll see if it happens. For what it's worth, in the same field, but not the same area, I rotate corn, soybeans, but in the same field, I actually saw a visual response to application of sulfur this year. I was able to find all 4 reps, and again, these are small plots, but all 4 reps were darker green than where I had other treatments in the field. So I think I'll probably get a response again this year, again in corn. We'll know whenever I harvest this fall. In soybeans, again, it's a high protein crop, which uses more sulfur. We would expect maybe to see some deficiencies here, but again, I've got a 1.8, only have one spot in there at 1.8, but here's a 2.3, a 2.3, no significant difference. The other point I want to make is we're probably going to see this in higher yielding situations. I've got one of my farmer friends, whenever we conduct our on-farm trials, he says, if we don't hit at least 65 bushels per acre, we probably have other limitations, where it be water or whatnot. So we've got some 68, 70s, things like that in here. So these are high yield trials and still not seeing a response. Some other work's been done in Ohio. Laura Lindsay put a note in our corn newsletter, corn.osu.edu. This would have been in early March. Summarize some of the work that she did last year across 8 locations. Only one site showed a slight yield increase, 3 bushels per acre. Luciline Floridor in Steve Coleman's lab up at Worcester is summarizing the data from all of us, not just me, Laura, Steve Coleman, but county educators. I know, Jason, you had some work as well. Eric Rieker up in Fulton County has some neat stuff he's done on some sand up there. So she's summarizing all of those trials. And 100 so far, she reported a year ago at the Conservation Utilities Conference. And she is this summer collecting more data from over the last year.
Oh, you mentioned lower organic matter soils and seeing that benefit sooner. I farm some soils that have less than 1% organic matter. What do I need to do to determine if sulfur is going to benefit my operation?
Rather than use sulfur on every acre, and I have a lot of farmers I work with who put it in the tank. They will add ammonium sulfate maybe, or thiosulfate, something like that, to their in-furrow mix or to their 2x2 mix, and do it on every acre. And when I ask them if they see a response to sulfur, they go, of course, I put it on every acre. But no, they don't see a response in every acre. It's going to show up in spots first. So the spots in a field, or if a whole field is 1% organic matter, that is where we're more likely to see it, not required or not necessarily going to see it, but more likely to see it. So I recommend to farmers they do a strip test, maybe put out a strip of ammonium sulfate or gypsum. Gypsum's cheap and it's easy to get a hold of. Maybe put a strip across the middle of the field, or maybe even at the angle across the field, and then do your yield checks with your yield monitor at the end of the year and see if you might have something pop up. My guess is over time, things will start to pop up, but not necessarily every year. I know the work that's been done in Indiana and Illinois, they can go back to the same field repeatedly. Maybe in 2018, they saw a response, but they don't see it in 2020. And that's with the same crop would be in corn. So put a strip test out across the field. I said, use a sulfate form for the most part. If you think you're going to use elemental or Tiger 90, something like that, 90% sulfur, put that out the year before you want to do your yield check. It takes several months for elemental sulfur to become available to the crop. sulfates would be available the year you apply them.
Now, in our area, there's quite a few growers that have swine operations. I work with a few dairy operations. Are they going to see the same sort of potential benefit someday of applying a sulfur source, or is it different because they're using manures on their fields?
So manures are really good fertilizer, and they supply micronutrients, macronutrients, they supply sulfur. So I tell farmers if they're applying manures, don't bother putting sulfur in the tank or putting it next to the row. It would be a real waste of money. Swine manure, yeah, you're going to supply sulfur. And then I think I said earlier, we need about 15 to 20 pounds of sulfur per acre for our crops, whether it be corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa. More as the yield goes up. But we don't need necessarily to apply at all. I know a number of farmers who are putting on 20 pounds of sulfur per acre, thinking that, that's how much the crop needs. But we're even a low organic matter soil, even on our sands, we're still getting some sulfur. And so I've heard the remark from Steve Coleman, I'll repeat it now, that maybe we only need to apply 8 to 12 pounds of sulfur in those deficiency areas, not necessarily the full 20 pounds. But 100 pounds of gypsum gives you about 20 pounds of sulfur. It's an easy number to work with.
Excellent. I think that's some really great information, Harold. Thanks for joining us and sharing that today. Are there any resources we should be watching out for where information is going to be provided about future work on sulfur?
So Steve Coleman, our soil fertility specialist, is, in my opinion, doing a great job of pulling things together. Steve is also frequently puts articles in the Corn newsletter. Again, that's corn, corn.osu.edu. Stands for Crop Observation Recommendation Network, not for the crop. It's just an acronym. But Steve has done a very good job of putting his information in there. Conservation Tillage Conference, we have shared information, I think at least each of the last 3 years on sulfur there. I do 2 or 3 meetings a year with some of the county educators. Look at the tri-state fertilizer recommendations. We publish a summary, so about a month before Farm Science Review, we published a summary of those recommendations. And that gives you some great information, particularly about doing a strip test across your field, some guidelines on what the crop needs are on a per acre basis. And then again, keep up with us. I think we're doing a great job, and we will not stop doing sulfur work because we know we're in this changing situation with the reduced sulfur load going in the atmosphere.
All right. Excellent, Harold. Thank you for your advice and information today. I invite all of our participants to check out the rest of the posters and area here at the Farm Science Review Agronomic Crops area, and also visit all the vendors that are participating in Farm Science Review this year.